Hey everyone, so I'm just going to finish up the notes from class for today. We just have two more functions to do. We have the sine function and cosine function. So if you were with PA Distance last year, then you are not familiar with any of the trig graphs yet. You haven't done them yet. And so we're introducing them here, but we will get to them more in detail later. If you came from a different school, you may or may not have already done trig graphs. It just depends on the school. So for some of you, this stuff is completely unfamiliar, and for some of you, you may have seen it before. It just depends. It just depends on the school. But for now, this is what the sine graph looks like, and it really is just this graph that kind of goes up and down. It just oscillates, right? Because it just goes up and down, up and down, up and down forever and ever in the positive direction and in the negative direction. It never goes any higher than 1. It never goes any lower than -1. Okay? So our domain here is from -infinity to +infinity. And our range, like I said, it never goes any lower than -1. It never goes any higher than +1. And our roots where we cross the x-axis. And if you notice, the x-axis doesn't have like 1, 2, 3, 4, all those numbers. It has all these values of pi. Again, when we get to trig, for those who haven't done it yet, that will make more sense later. But for now, I just want you to realize that it's always a multiple of pi. So it's either 0 pi, 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. It would go on and on. Same in the negative direction. It's negative pi and then -2 pi. Then the next one, if this came back up again, right, that would be -3 pi. So, the roots are at multiples of pi. So we'll say pi times n, where n is an integer. Okay, where n is an integer. That little symbol just means n is a subset, or n is an element of the set of integers. You can just say where n is an integer if it's easier to type it that way in your notes. Our y-intercept is at 0, 0. And our increasing interval. So if you look at our graph, if from here to here is pi, halfway is pi over 2. Okay, so this halfway, this would be -pi/2. So I'm increasing from here to here, and then I do that again here. Right, and that goes cyclically. It is constantly increasing in those intervals. So we'll say it increases from -pi/2 to pi/2 and repeats every 2 pi. Okay, that repeats every 2 pi. We're decreasing from pi/2 to 3 pi/2. And again, that repeats. So I know, like I said, I know this might seem really foreign to you. And again, it's just because it is a basic function, but we haven't done trig functions yet. I promise it'll make more sense when we do them. But for now, you'll have that graph in front of you to go on, okay? The max is always occurring here at pi/2. And it's pi/2, then it would occur again 2 pi later, and then again 2 pi later. So we'll say that the max is at pi/2 every 2 pi. So every cycle of 2 pi. And then the min is at 3 pi/2 and every 2 pi after that. It is continuous, and it is in fact odd. Our end behavior, there really isn't one other than that it oscillates. Between -1 and 1, right? It never actually stops. It goes on and on forever, just going up and down between +1 and -1. And it's bounded above and below. Okay? It never goes any higher than 1, never goes any lower than -1. Okay, cosine is basically the same. Cosine is just, the graph just shifts a tiny bit. Okay, so if you look at the cosine graph, now the max is right across that y-axis. So now this one is actually even because it reflects over the y-axis. So I'm just going to throw this in here now. It's even, it's continuous. The end behavior is it oscillates between -1 and 1. It's bounded above and below. So those things are all the same except the even and odd is different, right? But everything else is the same. The domain again goes from -infinity to +infinity, and the range goes from -1 to 1. Now in this case, our roots are happening at pi/2. The last one it was pi, but this graph shifted. So now it's pi/2 times n. In this case, n is an odd integer. So it would be at pi/2, then at 3pi/2, then at 5pi/2. Okay, in this case, here's our y-intercept at 0, 1. If you notice here, we're increasing from pi to 2 pi. So here we're increasing. So I'm increasing from pi to 2 pi. Every 2 pi n, and I'm decreasing from 0 to pi. You see that? 0 to pi. Every 2 pi n. Okay, my max is at 0. And that happens every 2 pi n, and my min happens at pi, and that's every 2 pi n. So this 2 pi n just means every 2 pi the same thing keeps happening over and over again. It just repeats and repeats and repeats. Okay, and that's really all you need to worry about right now for the sine and cosine function. Like I said, we will get into them much more detail later on. Okay, but that's what I wanted to get to. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to get through that in class, but make sure you just fill in your notes there for those, and you should be able to do the assignment no problem. All right, guys, I'll catch you next time. Thanks, everyone.